Okay. So our final topic, there's no new content after this, concerns arguments for causal claims. And you already know what a causal claim is, really. Sometimes they can get a bit disguised. Causal claim makes a claim about why something happens or why something is true. So it answers a why question. Here are some examples. Sea levels have risen over the last century because of global warming. Notice the word because there is not being used as a premise indicator. And that's not an argument, that first thing. It's just a statement. It's a causal claim about what the cause of global temperatures of sea level rise is. You could say sea levels have risen over the last century due to global warming. The main cause of truancy are poor parenting and insufficient help for children who are struggling. That directly uses the word cause. Australian petrol prices have risen because the cost of crude oil has risen. Joe is anxious because he has 2 medical exams tomorrow. So because here is being used to introduce an explanation, a cause, why something's true. Not just telling you that Joe is anxious, it's telling you why he's anxious. Look at the last one. A diet high in fresh fruit and vegetables prevents cancer. Prevents is a causal concept, right? It means causes to not happen so much, something like that. A word for the opposite effect is encourage. Right. Enabled, yes. So we're going to be discussing how you can critically evaluate claims like this and arguments for claims like this. So we're going to be looking at what kind of evidence you would need to bring forth to establish a causal claim, like one of those. Well, consider first this example. She painted the house and then developed a nasty rash on her hands and face. So, conclusion, she must be allergic to chemicals in the paint. So the conclusion here is a causal claim, allergic to. What this is saying is the chemicals, some of the chemicals in the paint caused the rash. So is this a good argument? Does the conclusion follow? Is it supported? What do you think?
She was painting the outside of the house. She could have been allergic to something else outside.
Some pollen, did you say?
Yeah.
Right. Usually wouldn't affect your hands, but the general point is right. There could be some other explanation. Perhaps it was the paint, but there are various other explanations you could think of. Right? She might have got stung by an insect or something like that. Actually, about a year after I wrote this example, this happened to me. I was painting a fence, and at the end of the day, I had this rash on my arm. Oh, what was it? I think I've been stung by something, but I don't know. What's the evidence here? What's the premise? It's just a sequence of events. She painted the house, and then she got the rash. That's not enough to establish the conclusion, right? It might be the painting of the house that caused the rash, but then again it might not. It might be something else. It might have nothing to do whatsoever with her being outside and painting. Right? This is an example of the extremely common fallacy of reasoning about causal claims, called the post hoc fallacy, post hoc ergo propter hoc, which means after it, therefore, ergo is Latin for therefore, because of it. So it happened after it, therefore it happened because of it. It was caused by it. So it's this general pattern of reasoning. Something happened, A happened, and then, sometime later, B happened afterwards. So it must be that A causes B. Right. But that's obviously not right when you think about it. It's not irrelevant because causes have to come after their effects, right? So time travel stories aside, if A caused B, then it must be that A happens first and then B happens. But you can't reason the other way around. Just because A happened, then B happened later, that doesn't mean that A caused B, necessarily. Here's a more realistic example. The government's economic stimulus program is clearly working to reduce unemployment. So that's the conclusion of the argument. Here's the evidence. Since its introduction, the unemployment rate has fallen by 15%. So we introduced the policy, and then unemployment fell by 15%. So therefore the policy's working, right? That's a causal claim. It's saying that the fall in unemployment was caused by, at least in part, the policy. Right? But again, that doesn't follow. Why not? Yeah. Yeah. Have you noticed the answer to this question about support is nearly always basically the same? It might be for some other reason. Basically, that's always the answer. Yes, that's right. Unemployment might have been falling anyway, or fallen for some other reason that has nothing to do with the policy. Have you ever seen a better argument for the success of a government policy than something like that, though? Well, we did it, and then the effect we intended to achieve happened, so it worked. Well, maybe. It's actually very, very difficult to get good evidence for the success of a government policy, a big social policy. People are trying to do, these days, controlled experiments in social policy and law, but that's quite difficult to organise, right, as you can imagine. Here's an example that I photographed outside a church on Dandenong Road some years ago, and the sign says, "We pray, stuff happens." So presumably the idea is something like this. This church, we have effective prayer, right? So let's imagine something like this happens. You know, one of the congregation becomes ill, quite seriously ill, and everyone in the church prays for her, right, to get better. And then she gets better, right? We pray, stuff happens. It's quite a natural assumption or inference to make that, okay, so the prayer worked, right? We prayed and then she got better. But again, that's post hoc reasoning. Right? Just one thing happened and then another thing happened. Doesn't mean that the first thing caused the second thing. Have you ever had this experience? You've got to wake up unusually early for, say, a week. And this might be happening to you now, right? So you set your alarm to wake you up at, say, 6 a.m. And, you know, the first few mornings, the alarm goes off and you wake up and turn it off. Then after a few days, you find yourself waking up just before the alarm goes off, right? You wake up at like 5 to 6 because your body's got into that rhythm, and then you wake up and then the alarm goes off. Have you ever had that experience? Anything like that happen? So imagine that happened for a week, right? You wake up, alarm goes off a couple of minutes later. Wake up, alarm goes off a couple of minutes later, right? It'd be a mistake to think that your waking up is causing the alarm to go off, right? If only I'd kept my eyes shut for a bit longer, the alarm wouldn't have gone off. So that's the post hoc fallacy. Very, very common, very, very natural, but nonetheless a fallacy. Just because one thing happens and then another thing happens doesn't mean that's not enough to support the conclusion that the first thing caused the second thing.